Welcome to the latest episode of WSP's Anticipate podcast. I'm your host today, Kenneth Cobb, an Associate Director of Transport and Mobility at WSP Middle East. From Berlin to Bogota and everywhere in between, cycling has flourished in the wake of recent global events, and the renaissance from non-motorised modes of transport is showing no sign of hitting the brakes. In Dubai and many other Middle Eastern cities, recent shifts in thinking are also changing up gear to promote cycling as a mode of eco-friendly transit. In this episode, we're going to discuss emerging micromobility trends, regional perspectives, and attitudes towards cycling in general, as well as the role that public and private sectors can play in creating cities that are safe, comfortable, and convenient for people to travel by bicycle and other micromobility modes. I'm joined today by Michael Seth Wexler from the Copenhagenize Design Company, who are the creators of the Copenhagenize Index, the world's most comprehensive and holistic ranking of bicycle-friendly cities. Michael, great to have you with me today. Can you start by telling us just a little bit more about Copenhagenize Design Company?
Yeah, absolutely. So Copenhagenize Design Company, as we call ourselves, we're a small boutique but global design firm that focuses specifically on all matters relating to the bicycle, and specifically urban cycling, though, of course, when you're planning for the bicycle, you touch on all types of cycling in the end. We have 3 offices around the world, a small team in, of course, Copenhagen, with other teams in Paris, in France, and then here in Montreal, in Canada. And we've been kicking around for just over a decade. And really, our projects touch, like I said, on anything that has to do with the bicycle in our cities, in our urban spaces. So that will be everything from urban planning and design projects for districts or neighborhoods, or citywide bike or bike pedestrian plans, or integration with public transport, and then everything that would be on the communication side. So we've done projects with city clients on things like city branding for the bicycle, or active transportation education and encouragement campaigns. And then thirdly, the third prong of work we do is really focused on what we call research and education. So that's everything from our annual masterclass in Copenhagen, where we welcome many people from around the world to learn how Copenhagen has developed as a cycling city, which we're now taking on the road and actually this year doing in Montreal, to sort of show how Montreal is a developing bicycle city here in North America. And then our Copenhagenize Index, which we publish every 2 or so years, and rank the world's most bicycle-friendly cities around the world.
You certainly do have a very wide range of interests there, all relating to the biking. Just on the index, I anticipate that it's not an index just for the sake of an index. What are the achievements or the spurs to action that the index generates in cities? Because although there's quite a few cities on there that have been quite high up the index for a number of the editions of it, there are other cities that are coming into it. So how do they break into the index? What are the things that really get them going to the top?
I think what's interesting with our index is that it has created quite a bit of global buzz in different media sources, but also on social media, especially through Twitter. And although there are a number of readers of our index that might argue online of, oh well, Utrecht or Amsterdam should be above Copenhagen, and then other people will say, well, Copenhagen should be above Amsterdam. The top couple of cities to us at this point don't matter as much. What's really interesting in the index are sort of those mid-level top 20 cities, and the cities that are sort of at the bottom of the top 20. So still in the top 20 best cities in the world, because these are the ones that are really doing things differently. So, we have cities like Bogota who have been building incredible amounts of protected bikeways through the city and pop-up bikeways during COVID, but yet it's still a very, very congested, car-focused city, but yet there's a big change and a big push trying to change that. We have cities like Oslo, which was always very car-focused. It's a hilly city in Norway, and was always very focused on electric cars. But there has been, again, a huge push to remove thousands of car parking spaces for sort of quick, cheap, fast bike lanes to build out networks as quickly as possible in the last number of years. And then other examples like here in Vancouver in North America, they've really made amazing progress in the last 5 to 10 years on building out protected, connected networks that are integrated with public transport, so you can really be a multimodal or an intermodal citizen much more easily. So I think it's the purpose behind the index is very often to showcase these cities that, sometimes we call zero to hero, or, came up from nowhere as cycling cities. And they need to get recognized around the world, but also it needs to show mayors and public officials around the world that if you do actually invest and really work on making your city a better place to get around by bicycle for all ages and all abilities, you will get recognized. It's not just about the Amsterdams and Copenhagens, though if we want to be objective, they still, objectively are the best cycling cities in the world.
Mm-hmm. And you touched there on the pandemic, and I wanted to come to that anyway, because certainly across all the different modes of transport that we deal with here in WSP, certainly we can see some very radical changes as a result of the pandemic. Are you seeing really key changes in cycling as a result of the pandemic, and are they only applying in sort of up and coming cities, or are those leading cities also reinventing themselves in terms of cycling?
I don't think there is one answer to what's been happening with cycling since the pandemic. I think every city has reacted differently. I think there was a wave at the beginning of the lockdowns where there was a huge increase in cycling in a many number of cities around the world. From San Francisco to Bogota, to cities that are all quite different all around the world. And there were a lot of these pop-up bike lanes that were happening. I saw early on there was a really fantastic strategy that came out of Berlin for a lot of protected bike lanes that were pop-up and temporary to deal with social distancing and other modes of active and safe transportation in times of the pandemic. But I think since different cities have now taken different approaches of has that temporary infrastructure become has it been made permanent, or has it kind of faded away, or is there some sort of vestige of paint and posts left over from the beginning of the lockdowns that's still sort of sitting on the street? So I think we can see mixed results at this point. One example that is very close to home here in Montreal is that there were these amazing pop-up unidirectional bike lanes on both sides of a major north-south boulevard at the beginning of the lockdowns, which was hugely popular. The city was even tracking the number of people that had been using those bike lanes versus there were very few before, since it was a big, heavy boulevard. And ultimately, once things sort of calmed down, I guess, after the first wave, as we got into the second wave last autumn, the city then shifted its focus and saying, okay, we're going to make a permanent link. It wasn't exactly on that street, but we're going to create a permanent north-south link that they were able to pull off, and they're calling the Réseau Express Vélo, the Express Bike Network, which has been a huge success. It's a permanent, concrete, highly built, protected bike corridor north-south in the city. And there's been, immense use. It's now the busiest bike lane in the city, and it hasn't even existed for 1 year at this point. So there are examples of cities like Montreal where they saw that growth in cycling in temporary bike lanes, and then they turn that into a positive permanent gain. But there are other cities too where you saw these local neighborhood streets, and it was great and it offered some utility, but then eventually it sort of faded away. So I think it really depends on the city. And to be honest, the thing that makes me the most nervous, I think, is looking at where our public transport numbers are around the world. And since those haven't really recovered, I think a lot of the folks that you're seeing out by bike might have been public transport users before. I don't know if we have too much data right now to show how many people got out of their cars to ride bikes. I think car use has increased in quite a lot of cities around the world since the pandemic. So I think one of our biggest tasks now is how do we improve and maintain some of that bike use and bike facilities around the world, but also do that in tandem with public transit.
And that's an interesting question as to the mode shift, because certainly if it was just the same origin and destination and choosing a different mode, you're right that travel by car rebounded and indeed perhaps even exceeded the level it was at before. But if there's a trend towards more home working, for example, more flexible working, is that something that might actually encourage more cycle use? Because traditionally, you would say cycle use a little bit shorter journeys that people are willing to take by bike than they would take either by public transport or by car?
So I wouldn't directly say that I think that people working from home will then encourage people to ride bikes. I think we have to have a statement in the middle there. That is, if cities get smart and recognize that perhaps 20% of the traffic on the streets from pre-pandemic times is no longer on the streets because folks are working from home and those travel patterns are different, then we suddenly have 20% more of that road space that we can reallocate to other modes. If cities then utilize that space and create good networks and offer opportunities for people to actually use their bike to get around safely, then I think we will see that shift where you could maybe say correlation or causation from working from home equals more bike use. But I think the issue here, and this is what we're constantly missing in the conversation about active transportation around the world, is that people don't just choose to bike. People bike when there is a safe network to bike on. It's the same way that we say if you have a pool full of sharks, people are not going to go swimming, but get the sharks out of the pool, and suddenly people might start swimming. So, at the end of the day, we need a network, and that really comes to the city to actually build that network.
Dubai recently increased its commitment to becoming a more cycling-friendly city. For any cities that are looking to do so, and maybe with an eye to your index, what are the things that they really should learn from more established cities? Is it just the infrastructure, or are there other things that they equally need to focus on?
I think for any city, even a city in a climate such as Dubai's, any city can achieve an increase in their cycling modal share and the number of folks that are getting around by bike. I think we have to set what our standards are to maybe more of a realistic reality for that specific context that we're talking about. So perhaps, if we're able to really create a more cycling friendly environment in a city like Dubai, maybe we can hope to get up 5%. Maybe we can increase 5 to 7% in overall cycling across the city. Do we think we're going to see numbers, that rival the 55-60% of folks cycling like in central Copenhagen? Probably not. But at the end of the day, what gets people out onto their bikes is a safe network of protected infrastructure. So, of course, there are other things that cities can do to promote cycling through communication means and marketing campaigns, through having a very well integrated public transport and bike share and bike parking system, so folks can jump from one mode to the other. There's many other things that cities can do that promote bike use. But at the end of the day, there first and foremost has to be a network of safe areas that you can go. And there also has to be a balance in infrastructure between different modes that are on the street. So if we're dedicating all of our asphalt space to the car and giving bikes a small little strip off to the side, then we're not going to create any sort of real situation where people are engaged and excited to ride that bicycle. So the same way that to get users beyond captive users in public transport, we need to make sure that we offer services with those trains or those buses. We need to have comfortable environments for passengers and commuters. We need to have an easy payment and an affordable payment platform. We need to have reliable and fast and efficient and comfortable service. All of that applies to a bicycle network as well. But if there is no network, if there is no network of safe, protected lanes, then we're never going to even start getting our foot in the door. I think in a context like Dubai, where it is so hot in parts of the year, that there has to be an additional level of design that is focused on comfort. So I think having a tree canopy in any and all environments, looking to things like misting stations and rest stations and things like that are equally spaced out, and even intermodal changes that maybe are more densely packed in a network, so people can switch between modes. So you're not forced to take one long bike route with no opportunity to get off your bike if you need to fix it or you need to walk somewhere. So I think all of those together play a very important role in how a city like Dubai can become more bicycle friendly. But again, it first comes with a protected network of bike infrastructure.
And indeed, there are no Middle Eastern cities in the index, and they all have that same challenge of the climate, which, as you say, there are things that you can do to mitigate it, but you can't ever get over it entirely. I think there are some trends that we see in other modes of transport away from what has been traditionally very heavily dominant car use, and also some more road safety type issues. So are there also tips on that front that cities can adopt? You mentioned segregated lanes, but are there other things as well in terms of like how users should be educated to go by bike?
I mean, I think education is a very key component, of course, but at the same time, a big part of education is experience and exposure. So the same way that you're not going to be able to learn a second or a third language fluently unless you're fully exposed to it in your daily life at a regular interval, the same goes for understanding another mode of transportation and how to interact with them. So, we always say there is a tipping point in cities, and some cities it might be at 5%, some cities it may be at 6 or 7%, where you start to really notice cyclists. And again, that comes with a basic, we call minimum grid network. The example of Seville in Spain is a really interesting one where they had something like 1 or 2% modal share and put down almost overnight in a very, very quick period of time, a protected network of at least, I can't remember exactly how many kilometers. It must have been over 50 kilometers of protected, not necessarily the best designed bike infrastructure, but protected nonetheless. And within a matter of weeks to months, we really saw a huge jump in modal share. And from that point, you really start to notice bikes around you. And when you're noticing bikes around you, you also change your behavior as a pedestrian or as a car driver or a scooter driver, et cetera. And so I think if you build that infrastructure, people will start using that infrastructure. As we say, build it and they will come, or induce demand. But at that point, then other people can see these users around themselves and maybe start to consider, oh, maybe I could try this in my daily life because other people are doing it as well. So people can start to relate. So I think that's one of the best ways to start educating folks, is getting more people on bikes. And from there, really being able to push those conversations. And of course, that can happen through driver's ed as well. But at the same time, if you're teaching drivers when they get their license to look out for cyclists, but then they see no cyclists or the occasional rare cyclist on very different types of infrastructure throughout their experience driving, then it's really hard to tell a driver how they need to react to that cyclist in these different contexts. So I think these are kind of self-fulfilling prophecies that work with each other.
And does the awareness, maybe some one-off initiatives, so bike days or particular cycling events, are they really helpful, or are they more headline grabbing?
I think they are very helpful. But again, I think you see many cities that do that and stop there. They say, oh, we're going to showcase the bike. We're going to have thousands of cyclists taking over the highway for one day in the summer. And then suddenly everything goes back to normal. So everybody thinks of the bike as, oh, this fun family activity that we can do once a year. But that defeats the purpose of the event. If you can have a big event here in Montreal, we have a local organization called Vélo Québec that runs a weekend event every summer. They actually did it just this past weekend, where they do 2 activities. One is a night and one is a day activity. And this year, even with COVID, I think they got 9,000 people out on bikes, riding around the city, creating a huge loop around the city. And that's wonderful. And it's really created a lot of buzz. It's been 30 years they've been doing this. But meanwhile, the city invests and grows the network every single year. So if you're a regular citizen who's not yet cycling or comfortable cycling around your city, you can take part in this event, or you can see this massive cyclists once a year. But then also in your daily life, you start to see, oh, but there's actually a growing group of cyclists that are on the street in a regular day-to-day sort of sense. So, it invites people to take part in something that maybe they hadn't before. But then again, you have to have that infrastructure so people can then try it for themselves in their daily life.
For sure, as a cyclist myself in other countries, you certainly do feel a sort of bit of safety in numbers. You certainly, even if it's not a road safety, you do feel that, okay, actually I'm not doing something that is so unique that actually it's a valid part of the overall transport mix. And thinking about those different modes of transport, as you were talking about in the connections, the longer term changes that cities make through things like transit-oriented development, where you're actually trying to build that into the very fabric of the city, are there key examples that you could pick out from other global cities to say, yes, actually the way in which this neighborhood was redesigned or regenerated assisted that move to cycling?
I don't know exactly how to answer your question, in the sense that I think transit-oriented development is the direction that cities need to go, but also bicycle and transit-oriented development can only make that transit pattern even better and even healthier and more oriented towards transit. So, I think we can see many examples, and a lot of these examples that have had, decades to shine and develop are really, still in the Northern European context. The Netherlands really is really one of the I'd say the key examples around the world of where the bike and the train together has been able to have amazing increased capacity, where, from a national rail perspective, the Netherlands has been able to also have, a connected bike share and amazing bike parking design program, where all major train stations, or most major train stations across the country, have, the offer of an OV Fiets bike, which is the national rail bike share system, where you can essentially get on a bike share bike for your last mile trip when you've come from one city to the other within the Netherlands. So to have that really integrated approach, you can get so much farther, and you can make a transit-oriented development work so much better for so many different types of people. So if you do have a building within that, that denser transit node, that's maybe a little bit farther than walking distance, it's still interesting and intriguing to go use that public transport node rather than saying, I'm just going to take my car. So if you can make those first and those last miles interesting, convenient, and easy and comfortable, so that people don't then just go to their car because it's the most comfortable thing for them to do, then we really can see some positive benefits.
Mm-hmm. So the trends that we see in other modes of shared concepts in the ownership of the actual transport vehicle, that's also something that's really applying across the cycling world?
Well, I don't know if shared mobility in the cycling world is what's really changing the dynamic. I think the opportunity of shared bicycles gives folks a way to be even more multimodal. But I think having multiple offerings from shared to personal vehicles, and when I say vehicles, I mean bicycles as well, I think is a key of having that healthy transport mix. So, the Netherlands example that I gave, one travel pattern that you can see very often there is that somebody will come from, let's say, a small town near a larger transit node with their own personal bicycle, and they will bike on a fully protected, connected local network of paths that gets them to that major transit node, maybe cycling 3 to 5 kilometers. Once they get to the train station, they have a really high quality, safe, dedicated, secure bike parking facility to leave their personal bike, hop on a train easily with their pass, get to another urban destination that they need to. And from there, where they don't have a bike, they can get a shared bike and use that to get to their final destination and then go back at the end of the day, or, if it's a multi-day trip. And that integrated journey uses the train, it uses the shared bicycle facility and the personal bicycle. So all of that together makes that trip significantly more competitive and interesting than the car. But the moment that you have to, wait very long for an unreliable bus in your local neighborhood, or walk or take a taxi or drive to a park and ride that takes more space for that first 3 to 5 kilometers because you don't have good parking for your personal bicycle, the whole trip could be kind of ruined in a sense, and maybe people will just take their car. So I think all of that holistic planning with all the different options of how you could use a bicycle need to be taken into consideration.
Absolutely, and certainly when we look at all of our overall transport planning that we do, the whole multimodal approach, where it's seamless, where it's convenient, and where, as you say, the journey time is something which is very comparable by being stuck in the traffic, that's obviously where we can see that mode shift happening. One of the other trends that is very clear at the moment is the move to electric. And so also I was interested in whether e-bikes are helping to widen the appeal of cycling, because it's not then such a great bit of exercise, because the e-bike is smoothing that journey.
Yeah, I think you said it correctly. I think the e-bike does widen the appeal. It can increase the access to bicycles for more ages and more abilities of different backgrounds. I think there is unfortunately a trend of folks in certain sectors of the transport world saying, well, the e-bike is going to change everything. It's going to be the godsend. The same way where, the whole sharing economy and focusing on just getting everybody out of personal vehicles or personal bicycles, was also a trend for a while. I think we put too much reliance on one thing. So again, within that transport salad, that transport mix networks of options. I think having e-bikes available, having e-bikes as part of a shared bike fleet as well, which we now have here in Montreal as an example, is very positive. I mean, when you live in a hilly city or you live in a place that's very hot, I remember riding the e-bikes with Kareem around the Dubai Marina when we were in town. And although it was very hot, being able to coast on a bike on some of these multi-use trails in the marina to get from point A to point B faster and not have to walk in that heat and coast with the electric motor was actually very, very comfortable to be able to have a little bit of a, albeit hot breeze, but still a breeze nonetheless. It already helped me get to where I needed to go faster and avoid using a car or a taxi to get there. So I think, e-bike, again, it's not a panacea, but it's another wonderful addition, especially for cities that have additional constraints such as hills or weather.
As you say, Dubai fortunately doesn't have too much in the way of hills, so it's got a good topography to help generate cycle use. But what it does have, as you say, is the climate. There are some things that can be done, and I was also interested to think about, okay, so certainly from a London context, if I think about a previous experience, the provision of showers and other facilities at the workplace is also something which has been a key part of initiatives to try to increase cycling as a commuter mode of transport. Is that something that also applies globally? That idea of not just providing the infrastructure for the journey, but actually the facilities at the end point?
I think so. I think the endpoint facilities definitely cater to a certain demographic, and there are a certain number of people that either will bike more or will start biking if they had opportunity to shower at their end facilities. But I think when we look at some of the most bicycle-friendly cities in the world, again, the Copenhagens and the Amsterdams, very, very few people are requiring a shower at their end facility. At the end of the day, people are riding there because there's a network. And I think one thing that we often don't realize when we're trying to integrate bikes into cities that aren't necessarily bicycle friendly today is we're constantly using this image of what we call the mammal, the middle-aged man in Lycra. So we're saying that everyone's going to be a speed roadster and is going to, sweat their face off and is going to need a shower at the end of their trip. But, I would say I am the example of a cyclist who never needs a shower at the end of his trip because I'm very slow and I'm happy to be slow. And there's a lot of people that will just ride their bicycle if they have a safe place to do it because it's faster than walking. It's often faster than being in traffic in a car, and it's faster than certain unreliable public transport, if certain networks haven't been improved in certain cities. So I think at the end of the day, yes, having those facilities can definitely help for some. But again, it's not a panacea. And at the end of the day, if we don't have that network to get from point A to point B, you're not going to be able to have slow and fast, old and young, able and less able bodies on bicycles that can then, all partake in this transport mode.
So your approach is very definitely that it's a mode for all, because certainly some historically in the Middle East, of course, some more societal or behavioural considerations have been there as to who might be able to travel on their own, how you protect children in terms of the road safety angle. Again, you're definitely seeing that. That for the cities that have the best mode share, they are trying to appeal to all and not just concentrate, as you say, on one particular part of the demographic.
Of course, because if it was otherwise, then you would go to Amsterdam or Copenhagen and you would only see spandex-clad sports cyclists. But that's just not the reality. When you go to these cities, what people find more, unbelievably amazing when they're visiting for the first time, yes, it is the high number of bicycle users and commuters and riders, but it's also the diversity of people on bicycles and the diversity of bicycles that are ridden. So, we sometimes like to laugh about the types of bikes that we can see on the streets of Copenhagen. You can see everything in Copenhagen from a cargo bike that transports coffins to grave sites, to people on cargo bikes transporting their fridge to get from a shop to their house. So these are sites of bicycles that around the world people couldn't imagine are things that could be done by bicycle, but the bicycles look a little bit different. A cargo bike is something very new to a lot of people around the world. It's not just a trailer latched onto the back of your bike, but it's a wholly different 2 or 3 wheeled vehicle that is essentially a micromobility vehicle that is larger than a standard bicycle and smaller than a car, and significantly more efficient, and doesn't contribute to climate change. Can offer electrification for a comfortable ride, and also contributes to your health. So, when we start to think about the diversity of users and the diversity of bicycle vehicles, or pedal type vehicles that could be in use in micromobility and active mobility networks, it really expands the opportunity of who can partake in this transport form.
And I was thinking that as to how your index can grow and accommodate the fact that the traditional bicycle obviously has a general form, but as with the development of e-bikes, other forms of micromobility, I guess there's a point at which the city is supporting a wide range of sustainable transport modes, and not just focusing on one, which some people might not be as confident or as attracted to. So I don't know if you have a definition of what counts as a bicycle either now, or you think actually some of these new mobility modes, somehow they'll need to get counted as a bike as well.
Well, and I think part of that is tied to the issue around marketing communications that cities have or have not done over the years. So often when you ask somebody in a city where bicycles are rarely seen, would you ride a bicycle to get around your city? They say, no, absolutely not. I'm not able, or I'm not comfortable. And they have one image of one type of cyclist on one type of bike, potentially on a road that's congested and quite scary to ride on. So if we can start expanding that definition of what cycling is, then of course it becomes a lot more inclusive. So, for example, when you mentioned the index, one thing we are trying to do for the last number of years is we do have one of our 13 parameters that focuses specifically on cargo bikes. So we're going to look at not only what is being pushed in terms of official municipal policy in terms of cargo bike integration. Are there transport hubs where companies like UPS or FedEx or DHL might be promoted to have smaller micro mobility vehicles or cargo bikes to transport goods in their city, or is there an increase in the number of bike shops that offer different types of bikes in that city, or is it really hard to find? So for us, it ends up becoming a really interesting indicator of how is that bicycle culture, though we sometimes don't like to call it bicycle culture, how is that shifting in different cities around the world? I think the one point I would make about micromobility and all these different scooters and vehicles and e-this and e-that we're seeing on the streets is, I think the one potential danger and issue that we really need to be cognizant of is speed. So at the end of the day, when you're riding an electric scooter and you're not, having to use any of your physical activity or body to control that, and it's really just a switch or something that really just propels you forwards, there's a disconnection between you moving yourself through the city and the technology moving you through the city as well. And there does get to be a threshold where if folks are going so fast on these small vehicles versus people cycling next to them, pushing themselves with their own capacity, there is a big division. And if these folks are using the same facility, we know that speed can then be, one of the markers for danger. So we have to make sure that, either if we're talking about public electric bike share or scooter share systems, that we have speed limiters. So we create a max cap so that we can safely make sure that people are sharing protected lanes, so that protected lanes themselves over time then don't become dangerous for the more vulnerable within those lanes. But we also have to, be a little bit cognizant for policy that says who can and can't use these lanes. And it's not easy. I think even cities, leading cycling cities like Amsterdam in the world have been struggling with how to control electric delivery scooters in their bike lanes. And it's not an easy answer, but cities are trying to sort of innovate on that right now.
Mm-hmm. And certainly here in Dubai, I would say that e-scooters are probably more common than your traditional bicycle, although I think certainly in some of the older parts of Dubai, you do get sort of a home delivery service using a traditional bicycle. But for the newer apps for home delivery, they tend to be motorbikes that are doing that, because, of course, the value proposition of those is that you can an order and get it very, very quickly, and so therefore they are definitely reliant on some pretty some pretty powerful bikes to get people delivered on time. I think through what we've been talking about, there's been a very strong thread there of inclusivity in terms of trying to say, okay, this is part of a way that all people within the society can travel. Are there examples that you can think of specifically from some of the cities that you've mentioned where the progress has really been a mode share based on increasing from one particular gender? I'm thinking that typically, as you said, the stereotype is of male cycling. Have there been particular initiatives that have been gender based?
There was an initiative we wrote about in our index. We did in 2019. We did a series of success stories. One success story that we ended up highlighting was a women bike ride in Turkey to try to raise more awareness around cycling for women. So the title of the article that we wrote on this was a tasteful Turkish initiative to promote women on bikes in Izmir, Turkey. And so it was called the Fancy Women Bike Ride. And so it's now grown into like an annual parade of over 30,000 women to try to promote female cycling and showcase that, biking is not just for, one sex, but rather all. So I think, there's definitely a lot of wonderful examples in the advocacy space and in the event space for trying to change hearts and minds and understand that, anybody and everyone can be seen on a bicycle, and it's not just for one type of person. And then I think, one of the important lessons for cities is that they need to be observing who's riding bikes, and they need to be tracking certain important metrics, including metrics of inclusivity and metrics, specifically around race and gender, to try to understand who is using your network, and do you see a somewhat broad cross section of the general population on that mode, or are you really just seeing, white 40, 50-year-old men? And if that's the case, clearly something in the infrastructure is promoting, a certain type of user to use that mode rather than it being inclusive and comfortable for all. And that might be everything from physical infrastructure to lighting to the way that things are promoted through marketing. There's a lot of different ways that we can try to make sure that, different groups in society feel like something is for them. And again, I don't think, other than the base level of a good quality protected network, like I keep reiterating, I think everything else isn't itself a panacea, but is an addition that can get more and more different diverse groups onto a mode like the bicycle. And then I think it's a process that never really stops, that cities need to keep innovating on.
Absolutely, because I think really the whole challenge of mobility is to provide the access to all the other opportunities which enhance the livability of the city. So whether that is for education, whether that is for leisure, whether it's for employment, that's really what we're trying to achieve with the improved urban mobility. And that, of course, the most successful cities or the most vibrant cities will be able to serve all sections of their society, however people choose to travel, based on a multimodal network.
Of course. And I think also when we look at the most successful cycling cities in the world, and we look at the gender split, for example, of who's riding their bikes, it does mirror society. So it shows that there is this, representative cross section of society that is using this mode of transportation, which means that it is normalized in those cities. In other places, if it's just one type of user, then we can definitely get a sense that this isn't working for everyone, and that really gives us a sense of we need to start working more in certain areas to improve that for all.
Great. Thank you, Michael, for your time today. I think we've covered some very interesting points. For those of us who are living here in Dubai, have you got any final thoughts about how Dubai might yet break into the index?
Being from Montreal in Canada here, which is a very cold city as opposed to Dubai as a very hot city, I think it's always interesting to look at some of those comparisons of how weather can be an impediment for a lot of people to think about using the bicycle as a mode of transportation. And here in Montreal, we've been able to year by year design our way out of winter as it were. Been able to develop a system that clears vast amounts of snow from a protected bicycle network that has a good salting regime to make sure that bikes are not sliding on those protected lanes. And we've been able to see big growth in small numbers. It's still a percentage that rides every winter, but we've been able to see a growth year by year of the number of people that are cycling in the difficult season. So I think it's an important model to look to for Dubai. Although it's completely different in its weather, it is a place that has one season that is very, very, very uncomfortable from a weather perspective, but there are still design opportunities to improve active transportation, maybe not for everyone, but for some that choose to ride in that season. And in the nicer season, it's really not that uncomfortable to ride a bike whatsoever. So, whether it's the winter in Dubai when it's 25 to 30 degrees, and you could very easily ride a bicycle if you had a protected corridor. It's the same thing here in the summer in Montreal. You have 25 to 30 degrees. So I think trying to understand these constraints that we have in our cities and saying, let's get creative and let's find ways to even shift a few people to a better transport form that's within an integrated system of multimodal transit. I think that can leave us with really good opportunities for the future.
Michael, thank you again for joining me today. I look forward to seeing whether Dubai, or indeed any other Middle Eastern city, is in your Copenhagenize Index for 2021.
Cheers. Well, thanks for the talk today.
And to our listeners, if you enjoyed today's episode on mobility trends, please hit the subscribe button via our SoundCloud channel to stay up to date for more insights from industry experts and WSP's thought leaders.